The first shot wasn't fired by the aliens, it was us. And that's why they're afraid. The battlefield stretched into oblivion, a graveyard of steel and bone illuminated by the flickering embers of burning wreckage. Captain Dane Revik crouched behind a collapsed gravlift, pulse rifle locked against his shoulder. His HUD painted the terrain in shades of infrared, figures moved in the smoke, too fast, too silent. Vakar hunters. The werewolf-like aliens had been tracking them for hours. Dane exhaled slowly. His squad, 6 hardened fighters, fanned out behind him, weapons primed, eyes darting. The air reeked of charred metal and blood. This was supposed to be a smash-and-grab operation. Drop in, retrieve the artifact buried beneath the ruins of Shroud Abyss, and get the hell out. But the Zuldar and Vakar had other plans. On your left. Sergeant Ives barked. A blur of motion. A beast launched from the smoke, 8 feet of muscle and claws. It slammed into Ives, tearing through his shoulder armor. He screamed. Dane pivoted, fired. 3 shots. 2 in the chest, 1 in the skull. The Vakar warrior staggered, snarled, and collapsed, black ichor spilling onto the ground. More movement, 6, maybe 7 more closing in fast. Dane wiped sweat from his brow, his mind razor-sharp despite the exhaustion. Fall back. We're too exposed. His squad obeyed, retreating toward the half-buried ruins of what had once been a Zuldar outpost. Rubble and dead bodies formed a crude barricade. They took position, rifles humming, scanning the darkness. Command, this is Revik. We've got multiple hostiles, Vakar hunting pack, maybe a dozen strong. Requesting immediate evac. The comms crackled. Then, negative, Revik. No ships in range. You're on your own. Extract that artifact. Do not let it fall into enemy hands. Dane gritted his teeth. Of course. High Command only cared about results. No backup. No support. Just orders. A low, guttural growl echoed through the ruins. Then another. And another. The Vakar weren't retreating. They were waiting. Coordinating. Dane's grip on his rifle tightened. Smart bastards. He motioned his team into defensive formation, eyes locked on the shadows. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, silence. Not even the wind stirred. A single figure emerged from the smoke. Not like the others. Taller. Broader. Armor etched with crimson sigils. War Alpha. The leader. She stopped 10 paces from them, silver eyes glowing. The faint starlight illuminated her battle-scarred face, half feral, half regal. A predator in control. Her fur, dark as the void, rippled with barely restrained energy. Her claws flexed, but she did not attack. Dane adjusted his stance. He knew Vakar hierarchy. Killing the War Alpha could break their resolve, or make them fight harder. She cocked her head, studying him. Then, in flawless Terran standard, she spoke. Human. You fight well. You do not run. This is rare. Dane held his ground. Not rare. Just human. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Yes. I have heard of your kind. You build empires from nothing. You defy extinction. You are dangerous. And you're in my way. She exhaled, something between a growl and a chuckle. The artifact you seek, it is not yours to take. It belongs to the first ones. To us. Dane's gut tightened. So they did know about it. Then we have a problem. Her silver eyes narrowed. No. We have a choice. Surrender, and you will live. Fight, and you will die. Ives groaned, still clutching his shoulder. Dane weighed his options. They were pinned down, low on ammo. If he delayed, the Zuldar would catch up and wipe them all out. Surrender wasn't an option. You want a choice? Dane raised his rifle. Here's mine. He fired. The plasma bolt lanced toward her skull, too fast to dodge. But she moved anyway. In a single, blinding motion, she twisted, the shot grazing past. Then she lunged. Dane barely had time to react. One moment, he was aiming, the next, she was on him. They crashed into the rubble, his rifle torn from his hands. He lashed out, landing a brutal elbow to her jaw. She barely flinched. Her claws raked across his chest plate, sparks flying. Then she bit him. Not a killing bite. Not a wound. Something else. Pain seared through his body, liquid fire racing through his veins. His vision blurred. His pulse roared. His limbs locked. Something snapped. The battlefield vanished. His mind fractured. For a second, he saw her, not the warrior, not the enemy, but something deeper. A link. Ancient. Primal. Unbreakable. Then it was gone. Dane gasped, wrenching himself free. His squad was shouting, firing. The War Alpha staggered back, eyes wide. She touched her lips, as if stunned. "It is done," she whispered. Dane scrambled back, grabbing his sidearm. "The hell did you do to me?" The battlefield shifted. The Vakar warriors froze. The War Alpha stood taller. And then, Dane's blood ran cold. They bowed. Not to her. To him. Dane's breath came ragged, his body trembling as if his own blood had turned to molten iron. The battlefield remained unchanged, ruins, corpses, smoke curling in the cold air, but everything else had shifted. The Vakar warriors stood frozen, their feral eyes locked on him, muscles tense, poised for action. But they didn't attack. They bowed. Dane's pulse thundered. His team was still in formation, weapons raised, eyes flicking between him and the War Alpha, Kalera. The name seared into his brain, unbidden. Like an instinct he'd never known existed. What the hell is happening? Sergeant Ives rasped, clutching his wounded shoulder. Dane had no answer. Kalera straightened, her silver eyes dark with something unreadable. She took a slow step forward, unarmed but utterly in control. Dane forced himself to stand his ground. His mind screamed at him to move, fight, do something, but his body was locked in an invisible vice, something deeper than instinct, deeper than fear. A link. The bond. "You feel it," Kalera murmured, watching him as if seeing something no one else could. Dane clenched his fists. "What did you do to me?" Her lips curled, revealing the faintest glint of fangs. "I marked you." The words sank like a blade to the gut. Marked. The Vakar didn't form political alliances. They didn't do diplomacy. They fought, they conquered, and they swore fealty only to those worthy. The War Alpha had chosen him. Bullshit. Dane took a step back. Undo it. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. It cannot be undone. His hands itched for a weapon. His sidearm was holstered, but something inside him knew, if he raised it, if he fired, it wouldn't matter. The bond had already wrapped around him like steel chains, pulling at the edges of his mind. Ives let out a dry laugh. "Cap. I think you just got yourself a goddamn pet werewolf." Kalera's ears twitched. A low growl rumbled from her chest. "Watch your tongue, human." Ives paled. Dane lifted a hand, silencing both of them. "We don't have time for this. We need to move." His squad hesitated. They had followed him through hell, but this was something else. "Move. Now." His voice left no room for argument. They obeyed, but the air was thick with tension. The Vakar remained still, watching. Waiting. "And them?" Corporal Vallis asked, nodding toward the pack. Dane turned back to Kalera. He was not about to take orders from her, but like it or not, she had control over them. "You wanted me alive?" he asked. "Then prove it. Get them to stand down." Kalera considered him for a moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, she let out a sharp, guttural bark in her own tongue. The pack immediately withdrew, vanishing into the ruins like ghosts. Dane didn't waste a second. "Let's move." Half a click away. Dane's squad moved through the broken cityscape with precision, slipping between collapsed structures and jagged steel. The ruined Zuldar outpost loomed ahead, a fractured monument to their failure. The artifact was still buried deep inside, and Command had made it clear failure wasn't an option. The air was thick with tension. Kalara followed at his side, her gait effortless despite the heavy armor she wore. The wound he'd inflicted on her earlier had already healed. Dane's head still throbbed. His muscles ached in ways that didn't feel natural. The bond gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, whispering things he didn't understand. He needed answers. "What is this bond?" he asked, voice low. Kalara's ears twitched, but she didn't look at him. "It is rare. Not intended. But now it is done. That doesn't answer my question." She glanced at him, silver eyes piercing. "It means you are mine. And I am yours." Dane's jaw tightened. "I don't belong to anyone." A slow smile crept across her lips. "Yet your body obeys." Rage flared in his chest. He ignored it. Focused on the mission. One problem at a time. Inside the ruins. The outpost was deathly silent. The kind of silence that never meant safety, only waiting danger. Dane led the squad through the main breach, rifles sweeping the dark. Debris crunched underfoot. Shadows stretched long against cracked walls. "Eyes up." "We're not alone," Valis muttered. She was right. Dane's HUD flickered, motion signatures. Slow. Methodical. Zuldar. The reptilian bastards were hunting. Positions. His squad melted into cover, weapons aimed at the main corridor. Then came the sound. Not footsteps. Not whispers. A hum. Low. Mechanical. Ancient. Dane turned toward the source, deeper inside the ruins. The artifact. And then, gunfire. The Zuldar attacked from the shadows. Plasma bolts tore through the walls, forcing the squad into defensive positions. Dane returned fire, dropping 2 before they could advance. The rest of his team followed suit, their training kicking in, precise and lethal. Kalara didn't hesitate. She moved like lightning, lunging into the fray, claws carving through armored scales. Brutal. Efficient. Unstoppable. But Dane wasn't watching her. His gaze locked onto the corridor. The artifact was glowing. And something inside him, something from the bond, called to it. A warning whispered in his blood. "This is bigger than you realize." The artifact pulsed. A low hum filled the air, sending vibrations through the cracked walls of the ruined outpost. Dane felt it in his teeth, his bones, the very marrow of his being. His breath hitched. This was no ordinary relic. It was alive. He pressed his back against the cold stone, gripping his rifle tighter. His squad was locked in battle with the Zuldar, plasma fire illuminating the crumbling corridors. Kalara was a blur of motion, ripping, tearing, killing, but Dane could barely focus. Something inside him shifted. A pressure. A pull. The bond flared, searing through his bloodstream like liquid lightning. His vision blurred, his heart hammering in time with the artifact's glow. And then, a voice. Not words. Not sound. A presence. Ancient. Endless. Whispering in the depths of his skull. Kalara snapped a Zuldar warrior's spine and turned to him, her silver eyes dark with urgency. "Dane, stay away from it." Too late. The artifact reacted. A pulse of raw energy exploded outward. The walls groaned, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. Dane staggered forward, his head splitting open with white-hot agony. Kalara lunged to pull him back, but stopped. She went rigid, her pupils dilating. No, Her voice was a whisper. A prayer. A curse. Because Dane wasn't just standing. He was changing. The awakening. The pulse of the artifact resonated with something inside him. Something primal. His fingers trembled, his nails lengthened. His hearing sharpened, his senses expanding outward like a living radar. He could hear everything, the dying gasps of a Zuldar soldier, the rapid heartbeats of his squad, the distant footsteps of more enemies approaching. And the bond? It wasn't just a chain linking him to Kalara anymore. It was a door. Wide open. Dane's breathing hitched. His muscles coiled, every fiber of his being poised on a razor's edge. He could feel Kalara, her pulse, her instincts, her hunger for battle. He wasn't just linked to her. He was becoming her. Dane. Kalara's voice snapped through the haze. His vision refocused. His squad was still fighting. Ives was bleeding, Valis pinned down by suppressing fire. The Zuldar were regrouping, their forces closing in. The mission wasn't over. He wasn't done. Dane moved. Faster than thought. Faster than humanly possible. 1 second, he was standing still, the next, he was among them. A Zuldar turned, weapon raised, Dane grabbed the barrel, twisted. Snap. The alien's wrist broke like dry wood. Dane ripped the rifle away and fired point blank, plasma tearing through armor and flesh. Another enemy lunged, Dane sidestepped, his movements fluid, instinctive. He drove his elbow into the Zuldar's throat, spun, and planted a boot square in its chest. The reptilian flew backward, crashing into the rubble. Ives gawked. Holy shit. Dane barely heard him. He could smell their fear. Kalara watched him, her chest rising and falling. Not with fear. Not with shock. With recognition. Dane had felt this power before, in her. She knew. She had known this would happen. But there was no time to process it. The Zuldar leader, a towering brute clad in ceremonial battle armor, stepped into the light. His obsidian-scaled face was unreadable, but his voice dripped with contempt. You have no idea what you've done, human. Dane wiped blood from his knuckles, his voice colder than steel. Enlighten me. The warlord's slitted eyes narrowed. That relic is not a weapon. It is a cage. And you have just shattered the lock. The artifact pulsed again. And this time, something answered. The reckoning. A tear formed in reality. A ripple in space, a distortion so wrong it sent every hair on Dane's body standing on end. Something was coming. The Zuldar warlord bared his fangs. You think we came to claim it? We came to ensure it was never found. Dane's gut twisted. This wasn't about power. It was about containment. A shape slithered through the rift, impossibly dark, impossibly vast. It didn't crawl. It didn't walk. It seeped into existence. A mass of writhing limbs, shifting faces, whispering mouths that spoke in a language no mortal throat could form. It wasn't an alien. It was older. Something that should not be. The Zuldar leader turned, his arrogance gone. Even he feared it. Kalara snarled, stepping in front of Dane. We need to go. Now. Dane couldn't move. His body was still thrumming with power, his mind still reeling from what had just happened, what he had just become. And the thing in the rift? It was looking at him. Not at the Zuldar. Not at the Vakar. At him. It recognized him. The whispers became a singular voice. A name. His name. Dane. The rift lurched. Dane's instincts, his new instincts, screamed at him to run. But he didn't. He charged. The aftermath. The battle lasted minutes. The Zuldar retreated. The squad barely survived. The rift? Closed. But not before something slipped through. Dane didn't remember how he ended up outside the ruins, staring at the burning wreckage of the outpost. His head pounded, his veins still alight with alien energy. Kalara stood beside him, blood staining her armor. "It is not over," she said softly. Dane exhaled. "No. It isn't." The artifact was gone, destroyed in the battle. But the thing inside it? It wasn't trapped anymore. And neither was Dane. He turned to Kalara. "Tell me what you know. About the bond. About what I'm becoming." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then, quietly, she said, "You are not the same as you were, human. And you never will be again." Final scene. Dane watches his hands, his clawed hands. The bond has changed him, and something inside him is awakening. The war isn't just between humans, Vakar, and Zuldar anymore. Something older has entered the field. And Dane Revik? He's right in the middle of it. Dane stared at his hands. His clawed hands. The blood smeared across them, Zuldar, Vakar, maybe even his own, was already drying, but that wasn't what held him in place. It was the shape of them. The way his fingers had elongated, the nails sharpened into something more. Something not human. He clenched his fists. The claws receded, shifted, back into normal skin. Like they had never been there. But they had. And he had used them. The night air was thin, cold, wrong. The outpost behind them smoldered, its twisted ruins standing like the bones of some ancient beast. His squad had pulled back, silent, shaken. Not by the battle. They had fought wars before. They were shaken by him. Kalara stood a few feet away, watching him with an unreadable expression. Silver eyes gleaming under the broken moonlight, her presence was solid, unwavering, like she had already accepted what had happened. Dane hadn't. He sucked in a breath, the air burning his throat. His senses were still raw, too sharp. He could hear the distant scurry of insects through the rubble, the faint shift of Valis adjusting her gear, the steady drumbeat of Kalara's pulse. "Captain?" Valis' voice cut through the haze, hesitant. Dane turned. She didn't lower her rifle. Not aimed directly at him. But close enough. Dane exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. "Stay human. Stay in control. We need to move," he said. His voice came out steady. Good. That meant he was still himself. For now. The road ahead. They moved in silence. Dane led the way, navigating the shattered ruins like he had always known them. The bond pulled him forward, deeper into the war-torn landscape, and he hated how natural it felt. Kalara walked beside him. Always near, never straying. Her presence was a weight, a silent reminder that he was different now. They reached the outskirts of the city, where the land flattened into cracked ground and skeletal trees. The wreckage of war stretched far into the distance, ships long since abandoned, metal carcasses rusting under an indifferent sky. Then, Kalara spoke. "You're stronger than you should be." Dane scoffed. "No shit." She didn't smile. "It shouldn't be happening this fast. The bond should take weeks to change you. Months, even. But you," she studied him, her expression unreadable. "It's as if it was always inside you, waiting." Dane rolled his shoulders, trying to ignore the itch beneath his skin, the feeling of something else stirring inside him. "Then how do I stop it?" Kalara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You don't." His stomach turned. "That's not an answer. It's the only one." He stopped, turning to face her. "I didn't ask for this." She tilted her head. "Do you think I did?" Dane opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she was right. She hadn't planned this either. The bond had happened, forced itself into existence, and now neither of them had a choice. He looked away, jaw tight. "Then what happens to me?" Kalara took a step closer. He could feel her presence pressing against him, the bond stretching tight like a wire between them. "You survive, Dane. Or you don't. The first test." They didn't make it far before the Zuldar returned. Dane sensed them before he saw them. The air changed, thickened, as if reality itself was warning him. His fingers twitched, the hairs on his arms rising. Then came the sound. The low thrum of hovercraft engines. Dane pressed against a rusted ship hull, his squad mirroring the movement. Valis peered through her scope, lips pressed thin. 2 dropships, heavy loadout. They're searching for something. Dane knew what. The artifact was gone, but whatever had been inside it. That thing that had spoken his name, that had slipped through the rift before it closed. It was still out here. And they were hunting for it. A new voice crackled over their comms. The squad stiffened. Dane Revik. Not a question. Not a threat. A confirmation. The Zuldar knew who he was. Dane didn't hesitate. He clicked his comms off. We move. Now. They sprinted into the ruins, staying low, using the wreckage for cover. Dane could hear the dropships circling, scanning, hunting. The Zuldar didn't search. They didn't send warning shots. They executed. Valis cursed. They're dropping troops. We need to split. If we stay together, they'll pin us down. Dane nodded. You and Ives flank south. Kalera and I will draw them west. Regroup at the ridge in 20. Valis hesitated, glancing at Kalera. And if you start, you know. Dane met her gaze. Unflinching. Then shoot me. She didn't argue. The hunt begins. Dane and Kalera moved fast, their steps light against the debris-covered ground. The night was thick with tension. The Zuldar were close. Then, movement. Dane dropped, rifle snapping up. A Zuldar soldier stepped into view, weapon raised. Too slow. Dane fired first. The plasma round melted through armor, dropping the bastard before he could react. Kalera lunged past him, taking down another in a single motion, claws through the throat, body hitting the ground before it had time to scream. But the Zuldar weren't stupid. The moment they saw him fight, saw what he could do, they changed tactics. The next volley was a plasma. It was sonic rounds. Dane barely had time to react before the wave hit him. Pain. Raw and unfiltered. His nerves caught fire, his bones locking in place. Kalera roared, but even she couldn't reach him in time. A Zuldar commander stepped forward, helmet gleaming in the dim light. His voice was like broken glass. You are not human anymore. Dane's breath came in ragged gasps. His vision blurred, muscles trembling under the force of the sonic blast. The commander crouched, voice dripping with satisfaction. And that means you are no longer protected. Then he raised his blade. And Dane knew, this was it. He had a choice. Give in to the bond. Or die.